Hey, what's happening, guys? Dan Dario here with another Options and Play video update. So I have talked about all sorts of different things, earnings related, the last few days, and one thing I wanted to touch on, just as we kind of get going here with earnings and a lot of like the bigger names starting to come up, is risk reward. All right, and risk reward is a it's a very important concept, and it's going to be a little bit different for everybody, right? Some people have higher risk tolerance, or some people have lower risk tolerance. For me, it kind of comes down to pricing, all right? So, for option wise, my risk tolerance, not from like a dollar perspective. It's more I focus on risk reward from the perspective of the trade I draw up and what I'm looking to get out of it. Okay, and meaning that uh, normally I like the risk 50% to ideally make 100%. Right, that's how I view a lot of the option trades. I've talked about it a lot in the past. I use the 50 to 60% level. If I lose in a position, kind of like my exit, and then when things start to work, 100% return is typically where I like to start taking money off and or rolling. Right. Earnings a little bit different because earnings are inherently more risky, right? Because option pricing is more expensive, and the stocks are likely to have bigger gaps, right? So if you're thinking bullish, in your long calls, and say, for instance, which I'll talk about Netflix. Say Netflix has a unexpectedly bad quarter and it drops really hard, right? Like your options, you're probably not going to be able to get out at that 50 to 60% debit loss area, right? They could trade all the way down to like, you could take a 90% hit, you could take a 95% hit, you could take a 100% hit. Who knows? So for me, because earnings plays are inherently more risky, I want a higher return profile, right? So um, typically, typically where I want 100% return, 100% return would be the absolute low, like the absolute lowest of what I would draw up when it comes to an earnings trade, right? Like that's what I want at the minimum to be able to make. This becomes real important when you're doing spreads, right? Because for spreads, I mean, you basically are capping your upside potential or your downside potential, right? And it's just something that is really important to kind of keep in the back of your mind when you're doing spreads is that it's you want at minimum 2 to 1, right? At minimum. So if you're looking at call spreads on Netflix and they're 5 points wide, then to me, I would prefer to not pay more than $2.50, right? Because then that's the minimum risk to reward threshold that I would want on an earnings trade. Because again, the risk is higher, right? So if you pay 2.5, then the most you could potentially make is 2.5 on top of that, so 5 total, right? Because it's a $5 wide call spread. Now, tying it all back, when you're in a position, right, and well, say you're in a trade, right, and Netflix was really rallying. We were in this prior to numbers. We were in this a couple weeks ago looking for a rally into earnings, right, and then as the stock moves higher and the position starts to gain in value, in the back of my mind, you got to keep that risk reward profile in your head, right? So if the option if it's a $5 wide call spread and the option starts to get into like the 275, the 280, even like over $3, 325, then the risk reward just isn't as attractive going in, right? Because you could theoretically lose more if it moves against you, then you could potentially gain, right? So the risk reward profile is out of whack, and those are scenarios where I say, to me, it's not worth it because the reward profile is not worth it, right? So these are the things you really need to like focus on. And again, like 2 to 1 is about the minimum that I would draw up a trade for when it comes to earnings, just because that the risk associated with earnings is definitely higher, right? So when you're doing spreads, when you're doing butterflies, etc., when you're getting into some of these more complex trade ideas, it's definitely something you want to keep in the back of your mind. All right. Lots of earnings coming up. So if you're interested in more earnings trades with options or just more swing trade ideas, please follow up with the link in the description of the video for more information on options and play. Hope you guys have a great night. Stay well, and I will talk to you all tomorrow.